What are Lunar Iuno's biggest pros and cons? That's what I'm here to tell you today. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. To start, she is going to be Augusta's definitive best-in-slot teammate. This is because she has a very special effect in her kit, where whenever a character regenerates their shield every couple of seconds, she's able to provide them with some stacks of heavy damage amplification. She's able to provide up to 40% of that. This is a very specific ability that only 2 characters in the game are going to be able to utilize, Iuno herself, and of course, Augusta. So if you're a really big Augusta main, and you want to see her perform at her absolute best, then Iuno's going to be a really good pull for you. Because not only does she provide that specialized damage amplification, but she's also able to provide her of heavy percent in general through her outro skill, which is another buff that Augusta really appreciates. She's 100% designed as the premium teammate for Augusta, so if you have the Astrites to spend, and you're a big Augusta main, then she is 100% going to be an excellent investment for you. Because while Augusta does already have more Tefi and Yinlin, Iuno is going to be just a notch above, especially because she has a specific ability that's really good for Augusta in particular. However, you would be wrong to think that Iuno can only work with Augusta. Far from it, because another great pro regarding Iuno is that she's an amazing heavy attack support in general. Any main DPS that you can think of that currently uses heavy attacks as their main damage source, they are going to be able to use her excellently. Gion's going to be getting a nice upgrade with her. Now, we'll have to wait and see how much of an upgrade it actually is, because he does already have a very competent team with Shakona and Air Rover. However, if you don't have Shakona, then yes, Iuno's going to be an upgrade. However, if you do have Shakona, then if you're already using her with someone else, then I believe that Iuno's going to be a perfectly fine side grade. If Iuno's rotation time is short enough, then she may actually have a very reasonable chance at being Gion's new consistent best in slot across all game modes. So that's another nice buff to our 1.0 DPS. If you're a really big Gion fan, then she's going to be a good pickup for you. Otherwise, she's also likely to be very good for Absolution Phoebe. She does a lot of damage with her heavy attacks, so naturally, this is another good option for the Acolyte. It feels like that Acolyte has so many team options by this stage, but you know what? More for you Phoebe mains. Good for you. Zhonya's also going to be able to benefit from a release. However, is it worth getting Iuno specifically for Zhonya if you're a really big fan of her? Well, here's the thing. It kind of depends. I think that with Zhonya, it's more a case where if you're pulling Iuno for Augusta or for someone else already, then it's something nice that's usable. Because here's the thing. We need to see whether she would reasonably fit into a team that has Phoebe as the 3rd slot teammate. Generally speaking, you play Phoebe as the 2nd slot teammate for Zhonya. However, in order for her to take advantage of the heavy damage amplification, she would have to be the 2nd slot teammate. We're gonna have to see. Because usually you would use Spectral Rover as a 3rd slot Spectral teammate for Zhonya. However, if it can work, then there is a lot of potential here. But that's the key thing. We need to see if it's actually going to work. But nevertheless, it still remains as a nice optional synergy for Zhonya mains. Think of it kind of like using Shakona with Zhonya. It's not best in slot, but it's still something nice that you can do. And with that being said, I feel that the mains that are going to be benefiting the most from Iuno's release, aside from the obvious choice of Augusta mains, are going to be the Gion mains. He's an older DPS, and he would appreciate the help being brought up in the meta, especially considering that Iuno has good personal damage, and because Gion's own hypercarry damage is falling off nowadays, he's going to be able to really appreciate the additional damage that Iuno brings to the table. Speaking of which, that's another point that I'd like to highlight. Iuno is likely to do some really nice personal damage for a 2nd slot teammate. This tends to be the general trend with them nowadays. They all do more than just their general supportive capability. This is good for 2 main reasons in my opinion. Reason 1 I've already went over. The fact that it's going to be really nice for Gion mains because his damage is getting a bit lower, and for any other heavy attack DPS that releases where their damage might not be as high, Iuno is going to be able to compensate for that. And even if you're using her in a team where the main carry's damage is very high, then she's going to be able to add more on top of that as opposed to compensating. I will say it is likely that she's going to have a longer rotation to accommodate for the fact that Augusta has a shorter rotation, but either way, her own personal damage is likely to be high enough to the point where I feel like she's naturally going to outperform Mortefi in that regard. And the other reason why I think this is good, you're likely to be able to play Iuno as her own dedicated main DPS. It's likely not going to be as strong as using her as a support, but this is really nice for Iuno simps out there. Brant fans do the same thing. If they have a signature weapon, they use him as a main DPS. We'll have to see if Iuno's signature reliance is anywhere near as bad, but either way, the point is, you're gonna be able to main DPS her. So that's another fun use for your Iuno. And remember, she's able to utilize her own shield-based damage amplification, so that's also something else you can consider regarding her DPS playstyle. And that's also another really nice pro regarding Iuno. She has multiple teams that you're able to use her in. That means that whenever you pull for her, while she is a niche support, it still feels like there's multiple different characters that you're able to use her with. This is because heavy attacking is quite a popularly used damage type. There are multiple characters that do it. Therefore, it's not going to be like Roshia where whenever you pull for her, you are just getting her for Frolova. There's not really any other reasonable reason to pull for her. And it's not like Cantarella where you're mostly only getting her for Frolova. Because while those characters are good, it is undeniable that they are very niche, and they are very much designed to be used with that specific character. Whereas in Iuno's case, while she is being made as the Augusta teammate, she is still indeed very good with other characters. So that makes her quite a good all-rounder in general. I wouldn't necessarily recommend her as a first 5 stars, so to speak. However, she's still a very good pull if you're someone that's really invested into heavy attackers, and if you're someone that's very interested in continuing to invest in that archetype. However, as gloriously beautiful as this lunar lady is, she does have a couple of flaws to speak of. One of them being the fact that her damage amp is restrictive. It's very, very niche. No other character other than Augusta and Iuno herself are going to be able to take advantage of that 40% damage amp, because there's no other characters that are able to proc shield regularly. That is such a new and niche archetype that was obviously just made for these two characters. Obviously that could change in the future, and maybe we get more characters that proc shields often, but I can't see that being a regular thing that they do in the meta. It was obviously just made for these two characters in specific. I can't really see that being useful for heavy attackers down the line. It could be. I can't completely rule it out. Perhaps future heavy attackers are designed with a Iuno in mind, and they are given a shield-based quality, but I just don't really think that'll happen, especially considering that shields and Wuthering Waves, they're more so a byproduct of just something that's woven into a character's kit. Shields aren't really all that important in this game, so I don't really think they're ever going to be a major focus for Kuro, so unfortunately, her damage amp is basically just an Augusta-specific ability. Now don't get it twisted, this doesn't mean that Iuno is some bricked terrible unit if you don't have Augusta. That is the wrong mindset to have. Rather, it's just a shame that other characters aren't really able to leverage this specific buff of hers, which definitely would give her an edge over Mortefi definitively. I do still believe that she completes her task better than Mortefi does because they share a similar role as a heavy attack buffer, but it is still a shame that it's this restrictive. Granted, Augusta is quite a popular main DPS, so there are plenty of people that are going to be able to leverage this fact, but it still remains as a general flaw of the character. So keep that in mind, the damage amp is not universal. Another flaw of hers is that it's likely that she's going to have a longer rotation time, because like I mentioned earlier, Augusta's own rotation is quite short. This could cause issues in regards to your overall value, and what I mean by this is take Roshia for example. I want to say now that Iuno is nowhere near as cooked as Roshia was on launch. She is in a much better position, and I do not want you to draw those comparisons. Trust me, Iuno is a lot better. However, if she does have a longer rotation time, that is going to make Mortefi a more competitive option. The longer her rotation time is, the more appealing other options become for other characters. This is because field time is basically everything, and we can actually go back to Roshia's situation to explain this. Think about it. She was killed off by Sanhua, a character that has next to no field time and is extremely efficient at her job and providing basic percent to Camellia. Roshia's own buffing and damage was obviously better than Sanhua's, but the issue is that she just takes way too long in order to dish out her buffs and damage. She was essentially a dead on arrival unit because of that, and was later on saved by Frolova meta-wise. However, I don't think it's going to be as bad with Iuno, but I will say, the longer her rotation, the less valuable her buffs are going to be. That is generally how the cookie crumbles around here. Another issue with Iuno is that she can be quite easily replaced. She's a really good generalist pickup for accounts that have very well invested heavy attack characters, but if you have all the specific teammates for those individual characters, she's not as worth it. I will say that she's always going to be worth it for Augusta, because she is Augusta's best in slot teammate. She is going to be a noticeable upgrade. However, for other characters, we have good teams already. With Gion, it's not like we're still stuck with Mortefi since 1.0. You have the Shikona Air Rover team. There's not any urgent reason to pick up Iuno specifically. And in Absolution Phoebe's case, it's Absolution Phoebe. Do you need me to say anything more? She has so many team options, that lady. The Acolyte is completely swarmed with amazing choices that she can use. You don't really need Iuno in particular. She's going to be very strong, I should add. She's going to be an amazing option. But you definitely have other teammates. Shikona actually being one of them, and that's the thing. Shikona is running alongside Iuno, so there's actually some competition in that regard. And then in Zani's case, it's kind of awkward. So while she is definitely good for all of these characters, and I do think that she's going to be best in slot for Gion, just based in my personal opinion, we'll have to actually test out and see whether that's the case or not. It is true that there are multiple side grades or just direct other characters that are better to use than Iuno. She is definitely a good pull at the end of the day. I do still stand by that, but you don't need her by any means. I personally think that aside from her damage amp being so restrictive, her kit is quite well designed. She's definitely niche, but she's not insultingly niche. I can realistically see somebody wanting to spend a bunch of limited pulls on this character. It feels like you could do that and it would be a reasonable investment, unlike a character where they only have 1 or 2 teams, where in both of those teams they're not that good, or they're just okay. Definitely a good investment to make, but not a necessary one. That's my opinion on her. How about yourself? Are you going to be going for Iuno? Let me know down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Hopefully this video is able to tell you Iuno's biggest pros and cons. This has been Juice, signing out, and man, wouldn't it be really cool if this Iuno character was real? I can't believe I just talked for so long about a character that doesn't exist.